Hello and welcome to Business Today Television. I'm Abha Bakaya and with me, our managing editor Siddharth Zarabi. Today we're focusing on the IPO market. After the listing of Zomato, the interest around hitting the public market for funds has skyrocketed. Already in 2021, 36 IPOs were launched until August with a cumulative size of 60,300 crore rupees. Another 15 IPOs are in the pipeline, having garnered SEBI's approval. These IPOs are not only coming from startups, even legacy private companies are jumping in. Plus, with the stock markets climbing new highs practically every day, the secondary market is also being energetically tapped. Is this a sustainable boom or are we in a bubble? Joining us, an elite panel today, none other than Sanjeev Bikhchandani himself. He is the founder and vice chairman at InfoEdge. We've got Nilesh Shah, who's the group president and MD at Kotak Mahindra AMC, and Vijay Chandok, MD and CEO at ICICI Securities. What a fabulous opportunity to speak to all three of you, at the forefronts of your fields and with some great insight on what's happening within the markets, within the IPO segment and more. So Sanjeev, let me start off with you because given that some of your babies have really grabbed all the headlines, this time around with the listing of Zomato, of course, and consequently with Policy Bazaar also having applied, its DRHP. What's been the secret ingredient and what's leading to this IPO frenzy and some of these big tech names hitting the market all together at the same time?
Well, I think companies have come of age. They've achieved a certain size and scale where, they're capable of going public. And the market is conducive. They're capable of going public. There are investors in there who may want to exit and the time has come. So I think, the IPOs for these companies are an idea whose time has come. And there's no time like now when the market is ready. And that's it. Now, quite honestly, could Zomato have listed 2 years later? Possibly so. 3 years later, 5 years later, no problem. They were not challenged for cash. They had enough cash. They had the business that's growing. And they had investors who were patient. Likewise, Policy Bazaar. But I think what most entrepreneurs desire once they achieve a certain size and scale is independence and freedom. When you've got money from 8, 10, 12 investors, you sign a lot of restrictive agreements. So one secret desire of almost all founders is when I list, I will enter a different strategic space. My stock will have currency, my ESOP will have value, I will have perpetual access to capital, and I will be out of these restrictive agreements, and my investors, those who want to exit, can exit. So it ticks many boxes.
All right. Nilesh, I want to come to you and ask you a pretty straight up question, which is what many investors on the street keep asking. Should they invest anticipating profitability? And many of these companies, without singling out names, Nilesh, to be fair, do you think they will be profitable because the whole basic value proposition of profits then being distributed will not be met, Nilesh?
Undoubtedly, an investor should invest in company keeping in mind the path to profitability. But Siddharth, we are developing our understanding of valuing digital asset. If a steel company would have written off its entire steel plant in year one, we had the ability to depreciate that over the life of the asset and ignore the losses. In digital companies' case, they build platform, they get customer franchisee, but they write it off in the first year itself as they spend money. We are in the process of developing ability to value digital asset. I'm sure like steel plant, the platforms will create value over a period of time.
Vijay, let me come to you on the fact that, while of course all the tech companies and the digital names are grabbing all the headlines, a whole slew of other companies are also looking to tap the market, and we've seen pretty phenomenal subscription coming in even for those. So is this a function also of a lot of retail investor interest, a lot of global investor interest, all together coming in towards the equity markets at this point of time, looking for opportunities to invest?
Indeed, I think it's a confluence of several things playing out this now. Not just the retail investors, which are indeed coming in large numbers, but I think the overall environment has been very supportive. The outlook, it's actually supported by good earnings expansion as well. So the outlook is looking positive. The entire policy framework has been supportive, both domestically as well as globally. Liquidity is good. So I would believe that it's not just retail investors, it's that whole confluence which is taking place, which is driving the interest. And yeah, you're right. It's not just a technology play that's there, consumer technology play, but we are seeing good amount of issuances coming from the BFSI space. For instance, some of the new age BFSI sort of players, the payments entities and so on and so forth, health insurance entities and so on and so forth. So yeah, so it's getting pretty wider and expanded from the traditional definition of BFSI. I think healthcare is another interesting place of action, apart of course from technology and consumer. Interestingly, there's some good action taking place even on the in the more traditional, the industrial side. Recently, we saw a spate of such issues. So it's pretty widespread now.
Right. Sanjeev, I want to come to you on the point that Nilesh made, and for a much wider audience, a retail audience that is watching this show. Nilesh spoke about bettering the understanding of valuing digital assets. You are an old pro at this in terms of explaining what a digital asset is. I want you to explain to the current crop of investors who is looking at the current crop of tech companies, startup companies which are hitting the markets, what should be the top 3 things quickly that they need to keep in mind when valuing a digital asset?
I think 2-3 things come to my mind off the top of my head. I think first is the point Nilesh made. That's really important. देखिए जब digital company platform बनाती है, when a digital company builds a platform, right? Most of the expense is revenue expenditure. क्योंकि जो लोग प्लेटफॉर्म बनाते हैं उनकी तनख्वाहें होती हैं, आपका you have office rent, salaries. Sorry, I broke into Hindi. And therefore you're creating an asset which will yield value over the next decade, 2 decades, 3 decades. But the accounting norms are that the expenditure has to be expensed off now, as opposed to plant and machinery in a traditional manufacturing unit, which you will depreciate over the years. What this does do is that it causes huge losses to show up in the P&L immediately. But the asset is then milked over the years and exploited over the years. I think that's a very important point. I'm not asking for an accounting norm change. I don't think that's prudent. All I'm saying is understand that and give allowance for that while looking at digital asset. The second thing I'd look at is, is it a network effect market? Is it a winner-take-all market? What is the stickiness of the asset? Okay. The third is unit economics. Is it unit economics positive or negative? Are they selling below variable cost? Is it in a situation where the more you sell, the more you lose? Right? If these 3 things are okay, that the more you sell, the more you make, unit economics are good, discount for the revenue expenditure, and look at market share, network effect, and I think you're okay. But beyond that, look, there's a fair bit of faith and judgment about what will happen in the future with this company. But with some prudence, with some and a little bit of leap of faith, I think some of the companies are looking very good.
Nilesh, we have to take that conversation on valuation a little further because it just flummoxes the other part of the market. The skeptics just don't buy into it. What would you say to them? We saw this debate ensue even when Zomato listed, and there were experts suggesting it should have been listed at a third of its listing price or issue price. How would you address the naysayers in terms of really talking about value when it comes to some of these companies, or are we genuinely in a bubble?
So my question to those experts will be, if you believe company X should trade at 30 rupees and not 100 rupees, are you willing to sell that company at 30 rupees to me? I will be a buyer. You will get their conviction immediately. Number 2, again, this is winner takes all. What Sanjeev mentioned about digital asset, one very, very important point is that in food delivery business, there would have been 600 or 700 startups, and only 2 are surviving and prospering. Now, if you are in 598 other startups, destruction of capital is guaranteed. But if you are in two startups which are cornering market share and surviving and prospering, wealth creation probably is possible. If you see some of the existing companies which have reached that maturity level, and Sanjeev's own company, if I talk about, their profit margins are about 65%. And it's now a two players market in job search. So here the leader takes all the money, all the profits, all the wealth creation. And it is extremely important to find out who that winner will be. The critics will be right in 598 out of 600 companies. The fund manager has to be right in 2 out of 600 companies.
That's a brilliant point, Nilesh. I want to take that to Vijay. Vijay, simplify it for us. I will request you to take this example and explain. A decades-old scooter company producing scooters which are for the masses, and a new age startup getting into electronic scooters. Let's leave the technology question apart. How should a prospective investor, and you know the mood on the street today, people are even willing to put in 2,000 rupees because, you know, investing is almost becoming like a second culture or a subculture. How do you value a decades-old scooter company versus a startup company with totally fancy new age marketing?
So I'm going to come to the scooter story in a bit, but I just want to add a couple of points to the earlier conversation. I think we don't have to look too far. I completely agree with what Sanjeev mentioned in terms of the way these assets can actually translate into wealth creation, because you've expended a fair amount of costs upfront. It has got massive operating leverage. And we have seen, for instance, some of these business models in markets like China. We have seen business models in markets like US who have spent some passage of time from the state that the Indian companies are. And we've seen that if they've done a good job of it, have those parameters that we described in terms of you sell more, you make more money, the ability to expand profits in the course of the future life can be dramatic. It's geometric, actually, not arithmetic. So I think that's the story that really explains this kind of exuberance and valuation, and therefore I would view them from that lens, really. But coming to your scooter electric example that you just mentioned, the way one should think about it is that what's the future in terms of consumer preferences evolving, and the way in which regulatory sort of landscape is evolving, and what is the option and alternative that's there. So are you sort of in a sector where you have another 10 players competing with you, or are you in a space where there is going to be a huge shift in demand from a traditional sort of a segment to another segment where you don't have virtually any competition. So you're actually then not looking at taking a share of the market, but you're taking the market. So I think the way one should look at is what's the option that's coming up in a segment which is getting preferred by the emerging behavior shifts that are taking place in the minds of the customer. And that's the way one should look at it. If there are competition, then you would sort of look at it in a more benign way. But if there is no competition or no competing product, then you have to look at the whole industry potentially available for you.
Okay, that's an interesting point. And Sanjeev, I want to bring you in on that, because you always talked about deep consumer insights. You've talked about the potential for disruption. I think this year, again, you've invested in about 15 odd startups. So, clearly it continues to be a space that you are, you're heavily invested in. Zomato, I think you've mentioned that you're remaining invested there. You truly see the potential in the long term as well. Everyone, of course, wants to know, how you choose or how you select some of these companies that make it in the future. But when you are addressing deeper insights, what do you feel are going to be the outlier trends now when we're looking at the next batch of disruptors that come in?
First of all, we don't do it top down, quite simply because we don't have all the ideas.
Yeah.
We recognize that there are very smart people out there trying to do stuff, and they probably know more about that space than we know. Whichever they're doing it, we're not doing it. Okay, our job is so we meet 1,000 startups, invest in 5 or 10. So we see what's bubbling up from underneath, and does it make sense to us? And if it makes sense to us, we go ahead and do it. We are sometimes right, we are sometimes wrong, right? But one of the important questions we ask is, where did you get this idea from? Ye idea kahan se aaya? Now, if the answer is, it's happening in America, it will happen in India. Maybe it will, but for us, it's the wrong answer. If the answer is, hey, I observed this customer, then I observed a bunch of customers, and this is the problem they are facing, and so I went and solved it, and they began to buy from me, and now more and more customers are coming without me having to sell. According to us, that's natural traction, that's solving an unsolved problem, that's a customer insight. So, if I take 30 seconds more, the story of Zomato, the first question I asked Deepinder Goyal when I met him was, ye idea kahan se aaya? Basically, he had aggregated all the menu cards of all the restaurants in Delhi NCR, put them on one site. He called it Foodie Bay. That time, Zomato was called Foodie Bay. And I was using it, Hitesh was using it, and we liked it. And I reached out to him. And I said, yeah, the idea kahan se aaya? First time I met him, first meeting, he was 28 years old. And he started when he was 26. And he said, look, I was working in Bain Consulting. Now, Bain Consulting in Gurgaon office had maybe 50, 60 people, mostly young, mostly male, mostly single, many living away from home, which means they would not get food from home. Consulting had long hours. You ate 2 meals in the office, lunch and dinner. Office had a cafeteria that would not serve food, but you could bring your own food and eat it. So to make life easy, the admin team had aggregated all the menu cards of all the restaurants that would deliver to that location, put them in a file folder. And Deepinder said, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, there's a long line. I take 20 minutes to access the file. I get it with 50 seconds and have to decide. And then I call up the restaurant, and then food comes out in 40 minutes, then I eat. Huge problem. So I came in one Saturday and I scanned all these menu cards and uploaded them on my personal page on the office intranet. And within 3 days, the IT infra guy came to me and said, hey, what have you done? Why is 95% of internal traffic going to your page? So that's when the penny dropped. And he got the customer insight that aggregation of menu cards has got value. And that's what he went and did. It's a deep customer insight. Yeah. There were 50 people in their office, all smart consultants, all IIT IIM. Only he got that insight. And he did it. He went out on weekends, just picking a menu card from restaurants. When he had 800, he got the site. And that's how it happened.
Right.
So, we look for cues like that.
Right. Nilesh, a quick question with you, and this is the China question, and we somehow can't seem to escape that question. You have spoken about it. Again, for a very wide audience, what is the game happening in China, and how is India benefiting or likely to benefit when it comes to the subject that we are discussing?
Globally, investors have lost a lot of money as China pushed for common prosperity and cut down their technology company to sizes. Now that global capital will be looking for alternatives. The entire world is going to go for that global capital. But India probably is the only country which has the population and potential to meet Chinese equivalents. If we can work hard and get that global capital to Indian capital market, it will fund our entrepreneurs and it will create that alternative growth. If you look at 80s, China started collecting FDI of about $60 billion a year. We started collecting FDIs post 91 liberalization. And our run rate was 5, 10, 15, 20. That gap probably is reflected into the GDP differential of India and China, which were equal in 80s, and today they are 5 times bigger than us. Now let's take the advantage of this diversion in global capital and go for a double-digit growth path for next decade so that we can narrow the gap with China.
Quick follow-up, Abha, with Nilesh. Nilesh, while this is absolutely a correct kind of scenario, hopefully it will play out, explain to our viewers the difference between the Chinese market and the Indian market, because if global capital which was chasing China, given the margins there, can the Indian market also offer similar margins? Because we may have the numbers, but sometimes there are questions about margins, Nilesh.
Well, you have to back company equivalent of Suzuki When Suzuki came to India in 80s, who would have thought that their subsidiary company in India will make more motor cars than what Suzuki sells worldwide? And their company in India will have bigger market cap than Suzuki itself, which is incidentally also owning 53% of Maruti. And the most important thing, how many of Indian investors know that Maruti Suzuki, since its listing in 2003, in US dollar terms, have delivered better return than Honda, Toyota, and Nissan put together.
Okay.
So there are success stories in India. But at the end of the day, you have to back right entrepreneur, you have to back right business model. It is not your birthright to make money in India. You have to work hard to earn that money.
Right. Vijay, you know, with all this excitement and buzz around the IPOs, new investors or young investors are wondering, you know, whether or not they should even look at anything else. There's all this excitement about IPOs, and there's also an element of risk to that, right, for a younger investor or relatively novice investor, because the existing players in the market, and we crossed 59,000 yesterday, so we know that you know, there are some very good companies that are already on the index that are also great opportunities and great value. So how does one approach the market right now? What should be the strategy? Does one get very stock specific? Does one have a clear strategy that there should be X amount of tech in one's portfolio? What would you suggest?
Well, I think it would be fair to say that each investor will be guided by his own philosophy and his own risk appetite. That's important. It's also very important that he does so when he takes measures to come into the market. He does so in an informed way. He should be very clear what his objectives are. He should be very sort of guided by study that he does before he enters. I think there was a mention about that earlier on. Understand the business model, understand the fundamentals, and then take it from there. And people like us offer these services in terms of our research output, freely available on our site, ICICI Direct, from where he can access information and use that for taking his decisions. He also needs to understand, you know, sometimes this call is between an IPO versus something else. I would say that one should not look at an IPO very differently from a secondary market. So do similar kind of work before you do, but be very clear. Look, you're in from what kind of a time horizon, what kind of risk sort of a story you're willing to put yourself to. The other point I would also probably mention, you know, there's been a lot of talk in the minds of the young retail investors, many of them actually, on passives versus you know, actively managing. Last few years, the narrative that has played out is that perhaps passives have done pretty well, and you know, the actively managed funds have in a way had some catch up to do. In a market like this, I think this is a great time for doing a high quality active investment, because it's unless and until you have the ability to identify an outlier, because the valuations being where they are, this is the time when you have to identify those companies which have the ability to beat and anticipation already factored into their pricing to get that alpha. So great time actually now, to our mind, to get alpha investing.
Right. And Sanjeev, talking about risk, I also want to get your perspective on that. You know, as you mentioned, there's usually one that emerges, the leader in the pack, and that makes up for everything else. But for young investors possibly who are, you know, buying into some of these stories, what is the element of risk that one should be cognizant of?
Well, look, once a company gets to the public markets, I think a substantial amount of the risk has been defrayed. Then it's a question of assessing, you know, durability and sustainability of growth. Yeah. Is this valuation okay, or is it too high, right? The real big risks are very early stage, which is when typically small investors won't go in, or if they do, they'll go in with small sums of money, okay, through the angel network investing situation. And there, look, if you're doing angel investing, if you're doing less than 20, 30, 50, you know, and you don't have a portfolio approach, you know, it's very hard to predict, because there, you know, 1 in 10, 2 in 10, 3 in 10 will succeed, right? If you're just doing 1 or 2 or 3, you know, you may succeed in none, right? And therefore, angel investing, have a largish portfolio, put in small tickets in each, invest in a group, so that the cumulative money is enough, but you put small sum at risk. If you are looking at public markets, right, then it's different. A lot of the risk is over issues, valuation, issues, durability, and growth. If you're looking at IPO, most oversubscribed IPOs, you get a fraction of your application, right? And you may want to look at the aftermarket and see where things are and how to play that. But what I have learned myself the hard way, and I have been a terrible stock market investor. Over the decades. So, which is why I just focus on the company. I've only just begun to sort of dabble a little bit in the stock market. And I have found that a weekly sip or a monthly sip into public market stocks sometimes works the best, because you can't really predict.
Nilesh, a closing comment from you then, because I know you've always been a strong proponent of exactly what Sanjeev's talking about, value investing and consistent long-term investing. Given the markets are at these record highs, and I know you're bullish on the long term, but in the medium to near term, should we be cognizant of any speed bumps that may be up ahead?
Undoubtedly, Abha, it's money. We have to take it seriously. Always follow Warren Buffett's rule. Rule number 1, never lose money. Rule number 2, never forget rule number 1. This is time to be an investor, not a trader. Please moderate your return expectations. What we saw in last 18 months is not going to repeat it in next 36 months also. And please maintain your asset allocation. Time to be leveraged equity, overweight equity. Blind buyer of equity was in March, April, May, June 20. Now markets are fairly priced or little above fair value. So please maintain your asset allocation. This is not the time to be leveraged into market or overweight into market.
Wise words there, Abha, really. And I think if I can just add in very simple language, don't be greedy. I think that's the message that this very top-notch panel has given us, Abha.
Absolutely. It was so wonderful to speak with all of you. Nilesh Shah, Vijay Chandok and Sanjeev Bikhchandani joining Siddharth and myself here on the Business Today show. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.